We'll go ahead and get the committee as we're waiting for members to come in. As we're doing this, let me ask a question to Admiral Atkins. Tell us a little bit about the pilot program that you're all doing in Florida, the Maritime. I believe you're doing that with CBP.
Well, yes, sir. In fact, it's using the Guardian, and it's basically for us to understand in the Maritime, how do we take the sensors on that Predator B that has been marinized, and how do we use it? In fact, that's the same bird that we're using on the Deepwater Horizon oil spill. And so given the sensors and given its altitude, how do those sensors act in terms of finding the oil, tracking the oil, and how do we move that information from the bird to the shore and to those folks who can use it? So it's a real good effort to understand how to expand the utility of this tool to something that we didn't think about before, oil spills. You know, Deepwater Horizon was eye-opening in a lot of ways, and this is one in particular. Okay.
All right. Why don't we go ahead and continue with the ranking member, Mr. McCall from Texas. Recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and let me say what an honor it is to be the acting ranking member on this subcommittee. I want to thank the witnesses, and it's good to have some Texans here as well. I also want to thank the FAA for the certificate of authority that was issued for Texas Corpus Christi, and commend the chairman, Chairman Cuellar, for his hard work in getting that certificate accomplished. I'm not sure if you heard that or not, but
no,
I was complimenting you.
Well, I would just ask my staff, who's the gentleman next to me? I thought it was...
So I know you worked hard to get that certificate, and I was commending you for that. I want to talk about, in general, I appreciate the meeting we had yesterday. Very insightful. I think we in the Congress think, you know, all we have to do is appropriate dollars for UAV, and it's taken care of. But the fact of the matter is, when you talk about the systems and the complete systems, there's a lot more that goes into this, more than just a UAV. There's a ground control station, airfield infrastructure, the pilots that you've mentioned, and other additional funding for that. Which kind of takes me to my next question. This is going to be really, I think, focused more for the general and the admiral to answer this question. In terms of and let me say first, the UAVs, I think, are a real integral part of our secure border initiative. They're not the complete 100% answer to it, but I think it's one piece to providing the surveillance that we need. I think the point's been made that we're using this technology in Afghanistan and in Pakistan, and it's been effective to help secure that border. We ought to be using it, in my judgment, on the southwest border and northern border, which I'm pleased to see that we are going in that direction. But in terms of resources and needs, that's what we like to help you accomplish in terms of the mission, long-term mission in providing full security on the border with respect to UAVs. What is the need? What can Congress do to authorize and appropriate the appropriate resources that you need to accomplish this mission?
Well, I'd say a good first look at that would be the annual strategic plan that we provide the Congress. It covers more than just the UAS system. It covers the aircraft as well. But we've been working on our program now for 5 years, and I think we've built a pretty credible, though still small and maturing force. And in that plan, the last one, calls for a ultimate fleet of about 18 aircraft and the pilots and the associated equipment to go along with it. So if you look at your vision and your operational kind of needs, some of which is still evolving because it's based on a threat perhaps we haven't seen. Well, I think the UAVs in their current deployment are very helpful in terms of the missions we apply it for. I believe we're building a force for a threat and an experience we really haven't seen yet. It's something that's in the future. So you really have to decide what your need will ultimately be in terms of mission set. From that, you can get to aircraft, and from that, you can get to control sets and bases and all those things. I mean, we've had very good support from the Congress in building this program. We have another aircraft we'll procure next year, and that's very helpful. Our shortcomings have been in pilots Some of that is just the time it takes to grow one, finding people that want to do it and are competent to do it. We certainly need help in O&M. People forget that it takes, gas and spare parts, and most of the Predators are contractor support from General Atomics, not inexpensive. And then ultimately, when you go into main operating bases, the airplanes are just airplanes, but they do require hangars. Corpus would be a good example. It's a Navy training base. Hopefully, with their support, we're going to be hosted there. But hangars become an issue. So the reality is, I think that strategic plan would give the Congress a good sense, and then consistence on national priorities and resources. One can pick and choose about how rapid the growth could be based on emergent need. Today, our end state of 18 aircraft would be modified by our experience with the Guardian. So now we would look in our end game and have an acquisition decision memorandum for a fleet of ultimately 24. Today, we have 7 that are procured. We'll have 8 next year. And the supplemental, I believe the President has offered a couple additional ones. But our normal procurements in each budget cycle is about 1 system per year. So you can see how long that would take to get there.
I appreciate that. So as I understand it, the ultimate goal would be to get to 24.
If you accepted a vision that you would want the capability to provide this kind of overhead support on a contingency basis, in fact, that plan for 24 would allow for a 3-hour response to have a Predator overhead anywhere in the continental United States. And maybe we don't need that kind of capability. That's the uncertainty that you plan for, and while we haven't seen that strong requirements pull yet, maybe you only need part of that. So we're building as quickly as we can, and the limits really aren't aircraft right now. Sometimes it's COAs, and now that we've made some progress there, it's not COAs. Today, it's really pilots. In fact, people who can launch and recover. It goes back to the issues. We're all here talking about unmanned. The real issues have nothing to do with the unmanned part. The real issues are all about the manned piece, and this is a manpower-intensive system.
And we talked a lot about that yesterday. I think the pilots is, as you mentioned, is an important piece that's overlooked. And I know you requested 144. You've only received 24 of those positions. Would 144 help you complete this long-term mission?
Well, there really wasn't anything magic about the 144. The 24 was a specific appropriation from the Congress to help us with UAV pilots, and that was in 2009. The 144 actually included a lot of program managers, engineers. Air and Marine is a very small, high ops tempo. We do everything the Air Force, Navy, Army does, but we're really more like the special operations pieces. So our program offices in the Air Force might be 100 people. We're 4 or 5 people, doing multiple things. So the 144 was a plus-up to cover a lot of their areas besides just the pilots. There might have been another 20 or so pilots in that number that would be helpful, but pilots, right now, having them operationally is a concern. We can qualify many of the pilots that we have on board.
And when you mentioned the 24 number, you're talking about complete systems, UA systems.
Well, you wouldn't necessarily need 24 of everything. That would be 24 aircraft, and then below that there would be so many GCSs because you don't need a ground control system for every GCS. You'd have 6 operational sites, so you'd like to have 2 control sets at each site, 1 for a backup, and then we deploy these assets through Agile Falcon with the Coast Guard. We can fly the airplanes, we can truck them, and so if you deploy the airplanes to other places on this hemisphere, in fact, for other kind of missions supporting other federal and national entities, then you may need other things. But once you decide on a strategy and a plan, then you start to lay in. The 24 aircraft would be correct, but you wouldn't buy 24 GCS sets.
Right, and this won't happen overnight either. No. It takes time. I think incrementally each year you build to get to that number.
Right.
I know my time's expired, but is it okay if I can indulge the chair? Admiral, do you have any response to that question?
Yes, sir. The Coast Guard is right now in the needs definition phase, and that's why Congress last year appropriated $5 million through our Research and Development Test and Evaluation Fund to help us work with CBP and the Navy to understand existing ongoing efforts relative to UAS. And so our plan is to reduce our acquisition risk, reduce our operational risk by understanding and leveraging lessons learned from other UAS users already, DoD and our DHS brothers in CBP. In terms of future resource requirements, the Coast Guard requirement is going to be predicated on the type of bird that you ultimately decide you need and its capabilities, and how does that fit into our fixed wing, our gap, because our fixed wings provide so many resource hours to fly on a mission. And so depending on how much mission you have, you end up with a gap. And so anticipating that gap and working UAS into that gap is part of our solution set.
Let me just close with this comment, and that is, I think there's clearly bipartisan support for this mission. I look forward, as well, I know the chairman does as well, working with you to identify what the needs in terms of resources are for you. I think, as the chairman mentioned in his opening statement, we're really here to work with you and not against you. And so I just want to close with that comment. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. McCall. This time, the chair recognizes the gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. Pasquale. Pleasure.
Ms. Kalinowski, has the DEA and the ATF applied for these COAs?
I can get back to you with that specific information, but to my knowledge, no.
You don't have a breakdown of the applicants for the COA?
I do, back at the office. I did not bring that with me.
General, thank you for your service. And I'd like to ask a very specific question about how much stronger these unmanned aerial systems will make our border security efforts. And I would like to talk about two specific areas. The two specific areas are arms traffic and drugs, illicit drugs. And I would like to know what we're doing about it, be it north, south, and space. What are we doing about it as far as what we've been talking about here today? And secondly, what cooperation are you giving and you're getting from DEA and ATF?
Well, of course, ATF has a lot of efforts ongoing, and as the DEA on the arms transporting. Much of that is done, as you probably know, through the ports of entry. So there are a lot of sophisticated scanning and intelligence-based operations trying to interdict the flow of U.S. weapons going south through the ports of entry. DEA, we have a lot of relationship with. They have their own Air Force activities, but they do not operate the military-style equipment that we do, nor do they have the UAS capability. We routinely support very high-end DEA missions in the U.S. and outside U.S. borders in the Caribbean and other places with our Blackhawks and with our high-end equipment.
How effective would the unmanned craft be in seeking out the tremendous, what we've been reading anyway, transportation of drugs across the border into Mexico from the United States of America?
Now, I think these are very effective. They do similar things that the manned aircraft do, as the Admiral was talking about. In fact, we fly a lot of these aircraft, our P-3s, do similar kinds of work with the Coast Guard cutters out in the Eastern Pacific. But let me just offer you a little vignette to give you a sense for how it's actually working. We have ultralights flying across the Arizona border now, very small, single man, not very sophisticated, carry 250 pounds of marijuana. We can see these things from radar on some cases, depending on their altitude, and we track those to where they go. And when there's a predator overhead, then we can hand over that track to the predator, and the predator is talking with manned assets. And these aircraft, when they used to land in the desert, we could have a helicopter with a Border Patrol agent to interdict, get the airplane, get the dope, get the individual. I mean, that's pretty good. With the UAV, though, you have some options. You don't really have to interdict the airplane. And now they're dropping the drugs on the ground rather than landing because our interdiction has gotten so good. But what you can do, you can wait and loiter because now the UAV can fly all night. You can see who comes to pick the drug up, and depending on where they're going, you can tail, with overhead surveillance, the drug to the stash house, and you can take down the accumulation of all the loads plus all of the infrastructure. So there are a wide variety of capabilities that the UAVs have been bringing to our southern border operation for the past 5 years.
I'm sorry.
We have ground-based sensors, Vietnam era sensors laid all across our border.
How many agencies, General, are involved in interrupting and confiscating weapons across the borders of the United States of America? How many agencies are involved? Did you tell the committee that?
I would say that the bulk of the ones that you have named, certainly ATF, certainly ICE, certainly DEA, certainly U.S. Customs and Border Protections, and our partners, down south. In fact, there is a unified command, interagency, including the FBI, of all of the interested, and Coast Guard, all of the interested agencies that are focused on all of these things. They pick up weapons, they pick up narcotics, they pick up illegal immigrations, and they're looking for terrorists. I mean, the ATF is the primary agency responsible for those things, but we look for all of these things in the interdiction efforts.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I would like to have, and I think the committee would like to have, and we've asked for it before, all of the interdictions, the number of them, and in other words, let's quantify this. I want to know how effective we are in interdicting ourselves between the weapons that are coming from the United States into either Canada or Mexico. And I want to know all of these agents. If we have a unified command, and take the General's word for that, we should be able to tap into that command and find out how effective manned as well as unmanned craft are doing in helping us do that. I think we will be astonished to learn what those results are. And they're kind of unbelievable. And the same thing in terms of drug trafficking of drugs across our borders, back and forth. I've never seen a real detailed report to this committee about how effective we are in doing that. And I am not convinced, Mr. Chairman, that this is a priority of our governments to introduce weapons that are moving from the United States into Canada or Mexico, et cetera. And these weapons are being used against not only the populations of the countries I've just mentioned, but against our Border Patrol and our agencies, ATF and DEA specifically. And I believe it has gone on to a epidemic proportion. And I think that we need to know this. And can I rely on you to get that information?
Let me go ahead and say this. I think it's extremely important that we see results, because if there's an investment to be put in large numbers, we certainly have to see those results. So, General, go ahead and get us within 5 working days from today. That information, I will put it specifically in writing. I'll have the committee clerk get that. We'll work with you to make sure that we get that results. And like to get also the Coast Guard also to make sure we get that information within 5 working days. I'm sure you got that information available, and I think that would help for the ones that do believe in this project to make sure we sow this. And if there's people that have, individuals that do have questions, in order for them to analyze this, we need to get that information. So 5 working days from today. At this time, Ms. Prescott, if you're finished, I'm going to go ahead and move on to Ms. We'll get you that information to be shared with the committee members. This time, the gentlewoman from Texas, Ms. Jackson Lee, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank the chairman. I appreciate the committee holding this hearing with the ranking member, and I apologize for not being here for testimony. We were engaged in meetings regarding the crisis, ongoing crisis in Haiti, and maybe the potential for individuals seeking asylum here on the basis of the devastating conditions there. But I appreciate your presence and the importance of this hearing, and would like to just note some comments, and this will be the framework of my questioning. The Arizona law that is now in the center of controversy is obviously implemented on the basis of the inaction of the federal government and the need for states to take charge. It is moving toward epidemic stages because the state of Texas now has a legislator who has indicated that they intend to file similar legislation. And again, it falls back to, well, the federal government is not enforcing the law. These are unique equipment or unique assets that I assume are to be used to help us enforce the law. And they are particularly unique in their technology because they're unmanned, and they should give us the kind of information that could calm the fears of the citizens of Arizona and or the leadership of Arizona, and hopefully the rational leadership of Texas. I'd like to be able to be an advocate that we are in fact enforcing the law and that we need to further reform our laws through comprehensive immigration reform to be able to answer some of the concerns of my friend and colleague from New Jersey, and that is to protect our borders, to protect our staff in Customs and Border Protection, and to rid ourselves of the bad guys. So I would like to hear from Major General Kostanek and Rear Admiral Atkins, if this, and I don't know, I will yield to the two of you as to some direct success stories in the utilization of the unmanned aerial systems. Is it, one could point to some success stories on the border of Arizona? Can one point to some success stories on the border of Texas? And obviously there are a number of other, New Mexico, California, that would have some ultimate impact. But if you would, let's start with you, Major General.
Yes, in response to that, I would offer a vignette about how the predators have been used, particularly in the Arizona border, where that's one of the major corridors for illicit trafficking, both immigration and narcotics, with the platform. In the old classic days of border enforcement, and I know you all have been out to the deserts, very remote, very rugged, not a lot of infrastructure, so the Border Patrol still have horse patrols out there, drive out in ATVs and all type of things. With these sensors that we have across the border, the ones I was mentioning to the Congressman, they detect vibration or motion. So we have those arrayed all across the border on the U.S. side, and when something passes or something happens, in the traditional sense, a Border Patrol agent on a horse or a car or walking had to go out and see what set that sensor off. Unfortunately, these things are not very dependable. Wind will set them off. Animals will set them off. Sometimes it's a small group of migrants. Sometimes it's a large group of migrants. Sometimes it's 50 people carrying weapons and 50-pound bags of marijuana, and it makes a big difference. Today, and for the past 5 years, we've had predators not in the air all the time, but in the air nightly, and they're on patrol. When a sensor goes off, we don't send people out to look at the sensors anymore. The predator is already airborne, already loitering, flies over, looks at the sensor with a FLIR, and on a typical night, we might have 25 sensor activations go off in a 10-hour period. And out of 10 or 15 sensor activations, 12 of them might just be the wind. 2 might be animals, 1 might be a group of migrants, and 1 might be a big group carrying drugs. If it's a small group, we'll launch a single Border Patrol agent on a small helicopter. They'll land and they'll take care of the issue. If it's 50 people carrying weapons and 50-pound bags of marijuana, which we've had on numerous occasions, we launch the Black Hawk with a Border Patrol special team. The Black Hawk lands short, the predator stays on top, everybody's on night vision goggles, we use a laser from the system. Very efficient and effective way of getting the job done.
And let me quickly get this last question in, and then Admiral, if you can answer. But to the FAA quickly, and if the Chairman will indulge me in additional, ask unanimous consent for them to be able to answer the question. This goes to the 2 representatives, and particularly Mr. Allen, and then if Nancy Kalinowski would like to answer. And Admiral, I'd like you to finish on my first question, if you would. Many have expressed concerns about the length of time it takes the FAA to approve a certificate of authorization to operate a UAS in the national airspace. I'm concerned that it's a certificate of authorization and it's not regulated, and I frankly find that a problem. I'd like to explain how FAA's COA process works, what are FAA's primary concerns when it is determining whether to approve a COA, and finally, that some reports have indicated that the FAA is concerned about the potential for mid-air collision involving UASs. Would you elaborate? Would you think that there are safety challenges? And what measures do you think the FAA and UAS operators need to take to keep air traffic safe? Mr. Allen?
Yes, ma'am. Ms. Kanalski would be best disposed to talk to the COA process itself, so I'll address your other questions, if you please. In terms of the priority basis, as was stated earlier, it's a first-come, first-served basis, except for when the mission dictates that there is an issue of national security, of national defense, of a high priority in terms of a national disaster, and obviously then we up the priority and address those COAs immediately. We also have standing COAs to be approved at a moment's notice to address security and national catastrophe issues so that we do address those issues right away.
What is right away? 24 hours, 10 hours?
Within hours, within minutes, actually.
And do you consider the COS that these gentlemen work with as the national security? Is that what you're saying?
If you're looking at the track record, the first time they provided a COA request, I think it languished for approximately 2 years, and we agree that that's not appropriate. At the time, we did not know or not advise of the priority. When we were advised of the priority, those were worked very, very quickly to provide that capability. But in terms of say, a hurricane relief, fires, we have COAs ready to go to allow them to operate the UASs expeditiously and not waiting days, not waiting weeks. That's the priority.
Ms. Kalinowski, you have the answers to the other questions?
Yes, to apply for a certificate authorization, Congresswoman, the proponent submits the application online to the FAA, and then the FAA evaluates the request. Internally, the Air Traffic Organization examines the application first for feasibility. The airspace experts review and ensure the operation will not severely impact the efficiency or the safety of the national airspace system. And the application is then sent to Mr. Allen's organization and Flight Standards to evaluate the operational concept, the airworthiness of the release of the aircraft, the pilot and the crew qualifications, and the policies and the procedures used by the operator for the particular mission that they are proposing. From that in-depth safety evaluation, we write out special provisions. And then our internal offices confer together to address any of the remaining concerns that we might have and to harmonize some of the provisions that we've put forward in order to ensure that there is safety associated with a particular certificate of authorization. And we work closely with the proponents to understand their operational needs, their mission needs, and to balance that with the FAA safety concerns for the operation to ensure that there is no safety impact to the national airspace system.
I'll wait for my other answers, and I'll yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. At this time, the chair recognizes Mr. Carney for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I apologize if this was covered while I was away. In my other capacity, you know that I'm a Predator and Reaper mission commander, and one of the things that we have a challenge with is using all the data or interpreting all the data gathered. You know, even in a small, short duration mission, there is a lot of information there. Are you set up or setting up to be able to exploit all that information? Do you have PIs in place that can look at the information and interpret it, you know, and do the studies that you need to do? Looking at, for example, known crossing areas when they've been, you know, that sort of thing. You know, do we have in place the infrastructure needed to exploit everything we're going to get from this resource?
Well, 2 years ago, the answer to that would have been no. When we started operating the sensors in support of the hurricanes, clearly that was a part of our focus. And today, you know, thanks to some support we've had from the Hill, we're putting in a classic DoD PED cell into the AMOC this summer. In fact, it'll be operational towards the end of September. And the PED cell is processing, exploitation, and dissemination. So it does the real-time photo interpret, does real-time analysis, and then it does backshop dissemination to all the national users. For the last years, since the hurricanes, actually we've been using exactly the same capability at NGA. In fact, in supporting the Deepwater Horizon event, the Guardian is feeding imagery real-time to the NGA PED in St. Louis, and they're doing the data analysis and then sending it back to the management team, you know, in the Gulf. So no, this was the last piece of our operation that we had to build, and as we get into this next fiscal year, we are going to have that complete capability. And then downstream, we'll be putting other distributed PED cells at other places on the country, but we already have the connectivity and the relationship, not only within CBP and DHS, but also with the DoD protectorates, Northcom, Southcom, JADA South, to feed the real-time imagery direct to those infrastructures as well.
So are the DoD components actually helping back up what you guys are doing now, or?
Well, we're not using them on the PED cell, but we're actually buying exactly the same system that the Air Force Special Ops, the 11th Intel Squadron uses, so we don't reinvent the wheel. We're not taking any risks. We're buying that capability right off the shelf, and clearly their program officers are helping us with those acquisitions.
But your PED cells are fully manned?
Well, that's the next piece. We have some of those capabilities in place. Clearly, we'll have to grow those analysts over time.
Right.
In the short term, we do have help from DoD and other components that have that kind of expertise to help, but we'll grow that over time.
Okay. You know, we all understand the importance of the data gleaned, and you know, we miss things in the heat of the operation and become useful later when we're planning other missions and a better understanding of what's going on. So whatever you need Congress to do to authorize more PED cell development, do not hesitate to contact us.
Since you raised that issue, I would offer, maybe you're aware of this and perhaps not, but you know, the Predator Reapers, fairly limited streams, you know, fairly limited field of view and so forth. And of course, the Air Force is developing and about to deliver Gorgon Stare, which is a wide area. And if we have you know, too much data to deal with now, when that system comes online, it's going to be extraordinary. In fact, I just served on the Air Force Scientific Advisory Board summer study on UAS this year, and this is one of the biggest emergent problems with the U.S. They're generating so much information. It's the ability to actually get the real data from the information that's the problem, and that's even a investment that's harder to appreciate. You can see an airplane on the ramp, you can't see, you know, a digital analyst behind, you know, working these kind of things, but fundamentally important to the future, a real problem.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the hospitality you showed me and letting me sit in on your committee. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, it's always a pleasure. Members, I think we're pretty much done. I want to thank.
I know the chairman's time is moving. Could the Admiral just, I cut him off when I asked whether there was any impact on these.
1 minute to answer that question.
Thank you.
It's very brief. Ma'am, we don't fly any UASs, so I defer to the General's answers.
Are you not, well, they're not flown, they're unmanned. Do you not use any?
Not yet, ma'am. We're in the exploration phase. We're looking to get into the game.
All right. I know you don't. I understand your mission, but you're here, and so the question is whether you would be using any unmanned. I would just conclude, Mr. Chairman, by saying that I have a level of discomfort on the process of certification, and I have a level of discomfort of the effectiveness of them. I think the Major General did a very good job, but he spent a lot of time saying there was 99% of throwaways, and we got one or two, and when we got them, then we swoop down and get them. I don't know whether or not, well, my question then is, I'd like a detailed, and I think it was Mr. Pasquale's comment, response as to what are the success stories and whether or not there is a direct coordination that works between Major General's team and FAA so that it is immediately assessed as a national security issue, and all of the talk that was done about process, it is moved quickly and confirmed to be utilized. And I'd hope that we can get those answers as quickly as possible. I yield back to the distinguished chairman.
Right. Thank you very much, Mr. Jackson Lee. I would ask the FAA, Mr. Kalinsky, if y'all could go visit and spend some time with the chairwoman on this particular issue. I think that would be good. I know that I've spoken to the administrator several times on this issue and tell him I appreciate the work that he's doing. But if it's okay with you, Ms. Jackson Lee, I would ask him to spend some time. General, I think you're understanding, getting a feeling from some members, they want to see the results, including myself. If you would get that to us, and Ms. Lee, we are going to prepare a letter to give you the exact information. We'll get it out today because I do want to get it 5 working days from today so you can get it back to the committee. So we'll put a letter. If your input, get it over to our clerk. All right. Well, at this time, I want to thank all the witnesses for being here, for testifying, and we thank you for the information you provided, and of course the members. Members might have additional questions as you just saw, so please provide that over to us. Hearing no further business, the subcommittee stands adjourned. Thank you. Good day.